Hello there, and yes, here we are. It's DF Direct Weekly number 235, not including specials. Lots of news to get through this week. Let me introduce the panel. First of all, Oliver Mackenzie, hello.
Yes, Rich. Excited to act in some ways that hopefully people will enjoy today on this fine DF Direct recording morning.
And hello there, John Linneman.
Oh, hi, I didn't see you there. How you doing? It's good to be here. I was just waiting for the yes, Rich, and I got it. So my day is made. The podcast can begin.
And yes, before we continue, a quick shout out, as always, to our supporter program. Help to support the team to produce things like DF Direct Weekly and all of our other content. Patreon.com/Digital Foundry, or examine our merchandising wares at store.digitalfoundry.net. But with that, let's move on to our first news topic. So there was something of a flap, you might say, online this week with rumours suggesting that basically Microsoft was out of the console hardware game. This was brought to light with rumours from a leaker called Sneakers So, who had previously leaked the initial plans for porting Xbox games to other consoles, just looking at a Tweaktown report on that. And they're saying that there were indeed plans to make a next-generation Xbox console that went from quote-unquote really concrete to being quote-unquote up in the air. And there was the suggestion that it could actually be coming to a close. This actually also was backed up by, what could we say, the sort of diminishing presence of Microsoft Xbox console hardware within stores, which really isn't a good look. This was enough for Microsoft to actually put out a statement, basically refuting all of this. And the statement says this: "We are actively investing in our future first-party consoles and devices designed, engineered, and built by Xbox. For more details, the community can revisit our agreement announcement with AMD," which basically says status quo. Nothing has changed. John, I'm curious what you think about this flap. It seems to me that the problem is that Xbox has got a credibility problem at the moment, and I think it kind of goes back to the infamous 4 games business briefing, where Microsoft basically were sort of affirming the multi-platform strategy rumors, but at the same time saying, hey, don't worry, it's actually just a test we're doing right now. Which I think we could say is like broadly inaccurate. Games were in development for PlayStation 5 at that time. So what do you make of all of this?
Since that fateful presentation, Xbox has kind of stumbled big time. We've talked about this many times at this point. I think what they need to do now is essentially just keep their services going, keep things quietly humming in the background. And when they're ready to do something more, they just need to come out and sell it properly. Like, it's time to stop talking and prepare for doing. I almost feel like the brand is in such a position now where if they really want to save it, they almost have to relaunch everything. This is the new Xbox, not just here's a new console, but this is what Xbox now is. But they need a strong vision to back that up. I think just putting out more hardware and being yep, here's the next console and stuff, that's not going to do anything, man. It's too late. Even the hardcore Xbox fans are starting to question everything happening here. Just saying the hardware's still coming, that makes sense, I guess, to confirm that they're not giving up per se, but if they really want this to succeed, they've got to find some way to sell this in a way that makes it really compelling and interesting and fresh. It can't just be more Xbox, right? It really needs a strong vision behind it if they want to take this back. And they need to find a way to do that while sort of acknowledging their stumbles in the past decade or so.
Right.
Put it into people's minds that yes, we've made mistakes. We decided to take a completely different approach to this. And here's the new vision for Xbox. It can be done. I'm not saying it's going to be comparable size, but you look at where Apple was in the 90s versus what happened when Jobs came back and they started unveiling all that new product line. They so dramatically shifted what they were doing and the messaging around it that it completely changed the fate of the company, right? And again, not saying Microsoft is going to be swinging that high, but there's room for that kind of thing, I think. And there's people still love the Xbox brand. There's still a lot of nostalgia in it as well. I mean, I certainly have a lot. I've been thinking about Xbox 360 lately with anniversaries and such. And I feel like they can tap into this stuff, but they can't tap into it if they don't have something really exciting to bring along with it, right? And so that's basically where we're at. They've got to figure out a way to relaunch Xbox as a brand, as a thing, with whatever they're trying to do, and it has to be compelling, new, different from the competition, and actually make a case for why you would want to go back to them at this point. Right.
My reaction to when these rumors emerged was basically, the rumors were basically saying that next-gen Xbox Silicon will be in the cloud. You'll be able to access it that way, but there won't be a first-party console. Everyone was pointing to the AMD partnership agreements. But I think the thing about the AMD partnership agreements is that the silicon that Xbox is going to be producing could, in theory, and probably most likely will be used by OEMs to create their own Xbox consoles. So, the concept of an Xbox console going away just because Microsoft isn't making one, that's not really a thing. I mean, that silicon still exists. And the nature of the makeup of that silicon means that it can actually proliferate in a whole number of different ways. So, that was never really in doubt for me. What was in doubt was the concept of a first-party console. So when I saw the actual statement from Microsoft that, future first-party consoles are still coming, that was kind of good news, obviously, I think, because I do think they need to still be in the hardware game. But the problem is with these statements is that the track record of announcements, things could still change, right? You just don't know what's going to happen next with Microsoft. That's the thing. You don't know how long these statements remain valid for at this point. They're in a really sort of tenuous position from that perspective. And to be committing to a new console while the current ones are basically sort of disappearing from store shelves, massively overpriced, owing to the tariff situation, presumably, it really does make me sort of worry about the actual future of Xbox devices, especially when, there is the possibility that Xbox could actually morph into a kind of brand that is, as I said, the likes of Asus, MSI could, in theory, create their own Xboxes based on Xbox Silicon. Where do you sit on this, Oliver?
That's an interesting thing you bring up, Rich, there with the concept of OEMs introducing their own Xbox hardware. That's something that I was pondering as well. And I think ultimately kind of what this gets at, the kind of central tension here, is like, what is a next generation Xbox? What does that mean? Because if it's basically a Windows PC with maybe some additional BC features, obviously you have the Xbox full screen experience, elements like this that are designed to make that experience glide a little bit easier, to make that a little bit better. If that ships in the full form that Microsoft seems to be promising, will people say, oh, thank God there's a new Xbox console? I don't think they will necessarily. And if the core of that effort is Magnus, I'm sure Magnus will ship. But even if that does ship, or if it doesn't ship in the form that's currently specified, how meaningful is that? If it's not branded as an Xbox, how meaningful is that? If it's introduced by an OEM, by a third party, and it's branded as an Xbox, or what if it doesn't have this software feature or that software feature? It is kind of amorphous. It's not a defined concept in the same way that a Series X or Series S is. It's not that. So I think the question of what an Xbox console is, that is kind of the question in everyone's minds. And I think ultimately, if Microsoft does ship this effort, I don't know that that is going to read like an Xbox console to a lot of gamers, to a lot of users. And ultimately, it's also not helping the matters when Microsoft itself, you don't have to listen to me, just listen to Microsoft. When they introduced the Xbox ROG Ally, the ROG Xbox Ally, they aren't introducing that as a PC handheld, they're introducing it as an Xbox console, right? So they themselves are pushing this message out there, and I think that's a key part of their upcoming strategy. And ultimately, this is not a good situation for Microsoft as well, and I certainly wouldn't blame anyone for not taking their word at face value, because the situation for Microsoft on the ground is really bad with Xbox. Sales are declining. Obviously, the prices have gone up. Xbox presence in local stores. I went to EB Games, GameStop the other day. They had a very small Xbox section. People have been posting images. I sent one to John of Walmart's filling up their Xbox sections with DVDs or Switch games, obviously not portraying much confidence in that product. And the hardware seems to be going out of stock all over the place. So yeah, I think it's a bit tricky for Microsoft now, especially that Game Pass, which is kind of like their raison d'etre, their reason to exist for Xbox hardware in the absence of exclusives. That's $30 a month now for the full fat day one experience for all those games. That's very worrying. But on the plus side, there are some elements of Microsoft strategy that I am interested in. I'm very interested in this Xbox Ally device. I've pre-ordered one. The basic proposition of a handheld that plays PC games, I think Valve has proven that can be a very good concept with the Steam Deck. I think it's a compelling device. Potentially, certainly the hardware is very intriguing. You have those nice big grips that seem very comfortable. I'm always after portable gaming comfort. That seems quite nice. So there are some interesting things in the works for Xbox. I don't think it's totally doom and gloom, but kind of every sign, every kind of portention here, it's not a positive one, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's sort of a really bad thing that's happening here, which is essentially, there's three phases to it. A leak happens, there's some sort of mitigating messaging from Microsoft, and then the leak turns out to be true. And again, it all goes back to that 4 games business update podcast that they put out, because that was exactly the same thing, right? Leak happens, suggesting there's a multi-platform strategy happening, and then mitigating messaging comes out, and then months later it turns out to be true. And I think at this point, John, do you think there is an argument that Microsoft should essentially just tear the Band-Aid off and just tell us what's going on, fully and frankly, if they're not doing that already?
Maybe. Yeah,
the kind of drip feed is definitely damaging to their credibility.
They have such a serious messaging problem right now, to the point where people just don't believe them for the reasons that you've already stated, right? Which, to me, I hate to say it, but it almost feels like they need like a proper shakeup of the team, at least the public facing team, in a way to like restore that trust. But you can't restore that trust if you're not open about it in the first place as well. So like they need to solve both of those problems. Because it is fundamentally, there's a giant trust issue here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not good.
The sort of legacy of the 4 games thing is basically that, I'll just say it again. The rumor appears, then the messaging appears, and then the rumors are borne out to be true. And it's kind of like to the point now where the mitigating messaging always seems to suggest that there is perhaps something to the story. At least in this case, it seems to be a flat-out denial that first-party devices are a thing of the past. What I will say, though, is that everything that we've kind of learned from the last year or so seems to be suggesting that what a first-party device actually is going to change. We know that's definitely the case in terms of the kind of hybrid PC approach, which we're actually obviously going to be seeing in the ROG Ally X, the Xbox ROG. I always get the order wrong of whether it's ROG or
ROG
Xbox.
Xbox Ally.
Okay. Yeah. So, this is definitely a PC that's being sold as an Xbox, which, we've gone into depth on why that messaging is slightly odd as well. In that it's an Xbox that won't play all of your Xbox games. But, I don't know. I think it's just time now for some sort of positive message for the future, or at least an exposition of the strategy, like it or not. Meanwhile, of course, we just had the video that Mark Cerny and AMD put out, which is like, it's sort of positioning Sony as, potentially coming up with something that's super, super exciting, something we've really got to look forward to in the years to come. And I think that sort of messaging is absolutely fantastic. It gets you excited. With Xbox, it's undoubtedly going to be based on the same or very similar architecture, but, they're not talking about it. They're not presenting any kind of positive future for the for what Xbox gaming actually is. Any final thoughts on this before we move on, John?
No, I mean, I just want to see Xbox come back from this, and I don't like where they've been going, but like I hope that there's some way that they can sort of return and do something interesting. But fundamentally, I think it's not just them, it's just the industry as a whole, what games are, what young people are playing. It's such a tricky time right now. So I don't think any of us really have the answers.
Okay, Oliver?
There is a certain concern that I have in this era where Sony is coming out and saying forthrightly, we are leading the charge into next generation hardware. But even though Microsoft was signaling earlier about, hey, the next generation is going to be the most powerful generation leap we've ever seen, they aren't jumping on that train now. And they're being a little bit more quiet about it. At least they have been since, I think, July when they had that AMD announcement. And the other thing about it is that Sneakers SO leak that he was talking about, he basically said that without too much detail, there are going to be some layoffs and the plans are up in the air. Now, that's not really explicitly contradicted by Microsoft's statement, because they're basically saying we're investing in next generation hardware, and that's not really in doubt. I don't have doubts that they currently have plans to release a next generation console. The question is really like, are you meeting all your deadlines for that effort? Are all the fundings approved? Is everything proceeding on pace? Sometimes in big companies like this, the way that projects get canceled is they kind of just slow to a halt. No one's approving any budgets, and then it's just over. So I could definitely see a case like that where, I'm not saying this is the case, obviously, and I certainly hope it's not, but I could definitely see a case where this is like a slow motion thing where people are basically having to sign off, make budgets, make commitments, manufacturers are having to be involved, things like this. And maybe they're saying at some point, you know what, this is not actually going to be a viable project. Now, I hope that's not the case, but I could definitely see something like that occurring at some level. But certainly, I think there are some concerns in this. People have all kinds of opinions about the Xbox strategy. I'm not going to belabor that too much. I just think like there's a certain crushing weight of their acquisition spree, of the need to expand audience for things like Call of Duty beyond what the market can feasibly sustain. All of John's concerns, my concerns, people being outcompeted with mobile games and TikTok and different avenues for their attention. I think these are kind of existential questions for the game industry. And I think at the moment, Microsoft is not doing too well in a lot of those respects, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move on. Okay, next news topic. Embargo has lifted on Yooka-Replaylee. We haven't had time to put a full video together, but John, you're really, really impressed with it, with a couple of caveats, right?
Yeah, so I've been a fan of these games for a while, especially the second one, Impossible Lair, which was just excellent. But the original I also enjoyed, but it definitely had some rough edges. And so Yooka-Replaylee, what a name that is kind of a re-envisioning of that original game, but with a lot of major changes made to its core structure and flow. So like before talking about the tech side, just know it's like they've made vast changes to the basic flow of the game, as I said. So all moves now available from the start. Things like rolling around, no more energy consumption, the attacks feel better. They've made just like a lot of changes to just the way it feels to move and play the game, which makes the core gameplay feel better, right? And I think for any platform game, you need to get that core move set down just right. The original game didn't quite get it. This one does it a lot better. Secondly, they've sort of changed the way the progression works with the collectibles and the pages, and just sort of made something that I find more interesting to play around in. It's just, I think the overall flow and design of the levels now feels better. It's a lot more fun to go through, and there's less of the tedious bits from that original game in there. So they've basically taken that original and kind of like brought it up to another level, which I really like. So that's cool. And of course, along with that, they have improved the visuals significantly. I assume this is still running the Unity engine. Actually, I can find out right now. Hold on. And yes, I can confirm right now with my Switch. Viewers of the video podcast can see it. This is indeed still a Unity game. So they've simply updated it with those new visuals. And I want to say real quick, that's something that Playtonic has really did well over the last generation. Like at a time when a lot of developers, especially on Switch, were struggling to get great performance out of Unity games, Playtonic did awesome work. Not only did the original run very stable 30 on the original Switch, but the sequel, the 2D side-scrolling one, with 3D graphics, that was full on 60 FPS across every platform. So something really, really cool there. This one, though, is now 60 FPS on... So I've played it on PS5 and also Xbox, and you got 60 FPS there. And, of course, PC as well. Runs above 60 FPS. And I actually originally played the Steam demo back in the day. They released a Steam demo for Replay some months ago, and it was a mess, actually, on my PC. There was so much stuttering that, like, I heard a thump in the distance all the way in Berlin of Alex falling over from the shock and horror. It was not good. Thankfully, the final game, while I did encounter a couple tiny little stutters here and there, it's like 99% better. It's very smooth now. It supports full ultra-wide monitors with proper aspect ratio. It's above 60 FPS, so very, very smooth frame rates. That stuff's all great. So my only complaint really is that it doesn't have any sort of like more modern anti-aliasing techniques. So, and I guess they didn't implement stuff like the proper motion vectors needed to implement like DLSS or things like that, which would have been cool, but it's not here. But even still, it looks good. The problem, though, and they kind of announced this back at launch, is the Switch 2 version, disappointingly, turned out to also only just be 30 frames per second. And not only is it just 30 FPS, but it also has some frame pacing weirdness at times. So basically, the Switch 2 version doesn't look as good as any of the others at this point. They actually did issue a comment that they're looking at implementing a performance mode, which would be nice, but in its current state, with the limited AA features and what you get on the output, it's just not a great fit on the Switch 2, which is a shame because I feel like the Switch 2 is like a perfect platform for this, and having this at 60 on the system would have been awesome and something I kind of would have expected from these guys out of this release. So it's kind of a bummer that that's not the case.
Right.
Interestingly, when you first load this up on the Steam Deck, they also limit it to 30 FPS, which is interesting, right? But there's ways around that. And with playing with the settings a bit, you can actually get a nice 60 FPS experience on the deck.
Interesting.
So there is a lot of headroom still there to be explored. So I do have some confidence that they can probably get Switch 2 up to 60. It's just a shame it launched like this. Given that I feel like with the dearth of Switch 2 native software currently available, I feel like this would have been something that a lot of people might gravitate towards. Because a good old Banjo-Kazooie style platform game, one that's been dramatically overhauled, that's a nice thing to have, right? So, so yeah, I mean, I like this a lot. I was surprised by some of the reviews. Some people are into it, but I feel like I read the IGN review and it was just like they gave it a 5 out of 10. And like the criticisms just like had me raising my eyebrow. It read like somebody who had only ever played Astrobot as a platformer and it said, well, this isn't as good as Astrobot. That's the feeling I got. Not necessarily say that's the true, but like asking for this to be something that it's not is a bit weird because this is indeed an exploratory N64 style platformer. And if you liked the original or thought it was just okay, I actually do think that this is enough of an improvement that it's worth trying. And I think it's like an upgradable game as well if you have a digital copy. But although I understand the PS5 currently has some weird issues with that, where it's showing as like not available for purchase.
Okay.
If you already have it. So like some users are having trouble with the upgrade side of things, but they have acknowledged it and that seems to be fixed or it's in the process of being updated. So I don't know. I mean, did either of you guys play the original back in the day?
No, I didn't have time, unfortunately, which is the story of my life. But I think the interesting thing here is that 60 frames per second target for the current gen consoles. I mean, the original version was 30, right? So the technique they used of targeting the lowest platform first, as they did with Impossible Layer, and then building up from there. I just guess they couldn't do that this time around. It's just pure horsepower that's being used. I
assume my best guess is that this just kind of came in like really late. You know what I mean? Like, as we know, the Switch 2 dev kit situation wasn't the best for a lot of developers.
Right.
And they probably got the hardware a bit late. Because I guess another cool feature that I really like is like if on the bigger console versions than on PC, when you go through things like grass and snow, and the grass especially is cool. Grass is beautiful in this game. And as you run through it, you actually mat down the grass and it leaves a trail in your wake, right? So you actually have an effect on the grass, which I thought was great. And from what I could see, it doesn't seem to be in the Switch version.
Right.
So it's missing some of those details as well.
Okay, there's no Switch 1 version, right?
No, it is not on Switch 1. It's just is Switch 2 exclusive, which is no big surprise.
Well, I think we are asking for a current, a last gen 30 FPS game to be running at twice the frame rate on Switch 2, which does sound like a bit of a big ask.
I mean, to be fair though, I mean, it is still a pretty big visual increase over the original. So it's not just the same graphics, right? Like it is fully remade visuals. But still, you're right. Fundamentally, we would like to see 60 FPS on Switch 2. So that's kind of my big critique. And it's just a bummer that even if they get there, we won't get all the effects. Like that's really awesome grass. Which is something Rare always did. By the way, Rare always did this. Platonic being X-Rare, if you remember, tying this back into Xbox. Do you remember Cameo elements? And also Star Fox Adventures on GameCube. Both of those games had this like lush fields of grass that were like the 3D grass effects. And on Cameo, you go through it, parallax occlusion map textures everywhere, like flowing grass. It was like an absolute technical marvel. So I'm happy to see them embrace some of this stuff again in new ways. It's just a shame you don't get it on Switch 2.
I'm just happy that there is actually a Switch 2 version, bearing in mind the dearth of development kits out there.
True. True.
Yeah.
Oliver?
I'm kind of into this just because I did play some of the original on Nintendo Switch 1, and that was a 30 FPS title. Indeed, it was also 30 FPS on, I think, every console platform that shipped the Yooka-Replaylee in the original form.
Was. There was no 60 FPS console version of it.
And I think it also had double buffer VSync, if I'm not mistaken, because it would drop to like
I believe so.
20 FPS. So that's good. I'm not as much of a fan of the kind of Banjo-Kazooie collectathon kind of platformers, though. I really did like Impossible Lair. That was a great game. I like the DKC-style platformers. Good. That ran perfectly, too. I played it on Switch 1. It was just an amazingly smooth experience. I really, really enjoyed that. But in this case, in 2025, 30 FPS for a platformer, even if it's on a portable console, I don't love that, especially when on Switch. I know there aren't like a ton of Switch 2 games, but on Switch 2 at the moment, if you want to play high-quality platformers, there are a lot of options that will run at 60 FPS pretty easily there.
It's true.
So I'm not a big fan of that necessarily. But if they can bring it up to 60, I could definitely see myself playing this on Switch 2 because I do enjoy my Switch 2 platformers. I've been playing a lot of the new Donkey Kong, and I'm really enjoying that. So I could dig into this. Yeah.
Good stuff. All right. Well, with that, let's move on. Okay, next news story, and this one is potentially very exciting for a lot of people. It's been rumours for a long while now that Red Dead Redemption 2 is set to receive current-gen upgrades for PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series consoles. And obviously everybody wants 60 frames per second, right? But also there's talk of a Switch 2 version that's being in development. Now, the extent to which this is actually real or not is, up for grabs, right? We just don't know. It's just rumor mongering, except we actually have quote unquote confirmation that these remasters are real. Again, it remains in rumor territory, but the source is Nate the Hate 2, who has an exemplary track record of being supremely accurate with pretty much everything that he puts on Twitter.
Friend of the show. Good dude.
So, John, potentially very good news. I guess the bad news is he's saying, I have no update on timing for release.
I mean, that's Rockstar, isn't it?
Pretty much, yes.
They operate on their own timetables. They do stuff whenever they want, and it's fine. That's just what happens. So, I mean, on paper, this makes a ton of sense, right? Like, why not do this? Like, this is essentially just more money. More money. People will buy it. The game is huge. Upgrading it in this way would be appreciated. I think people would be into that. And of course, bringing it to Switch 2 makes a ton of sense given what they did with the Switch 1 release of Red Dead Redemption 1, right? So like it all just kind of lines up as like a thing that Rockstar is almost certainly doing. It's just a matter of one, when is it going to happen? And two, who's actually doing the development work? I mean, it could actually be. Was it Double 11? What was the
Yeah,
name?
those were the
The
guys that
studio
did it. Yeah, the first Red Dead.
Yeah, they did a good
Mhm.
job on that, and I think I'd like to see them take a shot at this as well if they're the ones that were tapped for, but we just don't know yet. The thing is though, is it's like I think on PS5, Xbox, whatever, you could actually do some nice improvements there. And we've actually seen Rockstar implement some major improvements into their engine, right? With like GTA 5, even going so far as to adding like ray tracing features, which is pretty nuts,
Mhm.
actually. Uh, it's conceivable that could be done for Red Dead. I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. Hard to say. But the chance is there. The thing to keep in mind though is that for the Switch 2, given what the hardware is, I wouldn't imagine we'd even see a version as good as the Xbox One X version on
Right.
there,
Okay. Well,
right?
that was
Mhm.
native 4K,
So
which is probably a bit of a stretch for the Switch.
that's a bit of a stretch here for the Switch 2, which makes me think that the Switch 2 version would just basically be the same as the last gen version, but like at a whatever Switch 2 appropriate resolution,
Yeah,
right?
sure. I think that would be fine, actually.
That would be fine. I think that would be fine. Absolutely. The game is still freaking gorgeous, man. Like when you look at the visuals in this, and it has to be said that the budget behind this must be kept in mind when looking at what they accomplished. But yeah, like just like the level of quality in the rendering is genuinely mind blowing even today.
Yeah. Oliver?
Yeah, I think on the Switch 2 side of things, it is an intriguing prospect because I think it would be immediately one of the best looking games, if not the best looking game potentially on the system, depending on how it's handled. But one thing I would be interested in is how they manage the file size, because this is a big game. It's about 110 gigabytes, I think, on last generation consoles.
Yeah.
The biggest Switch 2 game that I can recall is about 70 gigabytes. That's Split Fiction. There's nothing, I don't think there's anything stopping them from shipping a big game like this on Switch. But, I mean, obviously it's outside the realm of the cards. But even on the internal storage, you're using up like half the storage after OS and formatting, probably like half the storage just for this one game. Is that something they would do? I mean, it would certainly be an interesting concept. Obviously, maybe there'd be some like deduplication, some savings elsewhere. Maybe they do some additional compression, different compression and whatnot. There's some possibility of it being a lower footprint, but it's still a pretty substantial, I would say a pretty substantial size there. But in terms of what they would do for the current generation consoles, I mean, it's always interesting because I always thought this was like an excuse to print money, and it just seems so easy. Why not just do like an upgraded current generation version that runs at 60 FPS with, broadly speaking, pretty similar visuals to the last generation versions? It seems super easy to do. Maybe integrate some temporal upsampling so you can actually hit like a perceived 1800p or 4K resolution on the PS5s and the Series X's. That would be certainly quite nice. If they did do ray tracing, I wonder how far they would go, because you look at the GTA 5, the current GTA 5 port on PC. I think it's the Enhanced Edition or Definitive Edition, and that has 4 RTFX. It has RT Shadows, RTAO, RTGI, and RT Reflections. Looks extremely good on PC, but it's also very, very performant, very, very RDNA friendly, I would say. I just recently, actually, just a couple months ago, I beat the game again on PC with all the ray tracing turned up and custom soundtracks in the radio and having a super fun time with it. But I played a little bit on my ROG Ally as well, and I was hitting 40 FPS at 1080p with FSR upscaling with all 4 ray tracing effects turned on at very high settings. Like,
Wow.
it's super RDNA friendly ray tracing. And obviously this is like a simple game, but it still is pretty performant. So I do wonder, also you look at GTA 6, that's using RT Reflections, RTGI on the consoles as well at a decent performance levels from all we can see. So I would wonder if they could throw in some of those technologies in there. Now the utility of them is much diminished, I would say, in this game, but it would certainly be an intriguing prospect. I think the performance is certainly there on tap to probably deploy some of them, especially at 30 FPS, but it would be of lesser utility perhaps on that grade of hardware, I would say, with this game.
Yeah, I mean, global illumination would seem to be the most impactful technology to put there. Reflections probably less so, but who knows? I just like the idea that it is actually happening, seemingly, bearing in mind the credentials of the source on this. 60 frames per second, I think it is doable, probably not native 4K unless there is some sort of upscaling solution built in. I think that's eminently doable there. But, the concept of a 30 FPS quality mode, I think, there is potential there. I think it would be pretty cool.
That's true. You think this would be good fodder for introducing the PlayStation 6? Like we could open with Red Dead 2. I mean, they could also do GTA 6, but one of the two. As the first look at PlayStation 6.
I think you'd probably want to show a new game, right?
Well, that's what they did with PS5, famously. With PS4
PS5,
footage.
they showed GTA 5, so...
Yeah.
Crazy stuff. Well, the question of timing still remains up in the air, and the prior rumours were suggesting that it would happen later on this year, but there's no confirmation from the best leaker in the business. So I guess we just need to wait and see. But with that, let's move on. Okay, so final news topic of the week, and we're going to be talking about Halo, and there's certainly, two different stories we want to approach here, one of which is pretty cool, and the other is, I think, very worrying. John, take it away.
Okay, well, the positive story is, do you guys like Halo?
Well, oh, yeah.
Do you like Halo Combat Evolved? If you like Halo Combat Evolved, have you ever thought about, what if I could play Halo Combat Evolved in VR?
That would be fantastic.
Oh.
Be fantastic. Well... my friends, the day is upon us thanks to Winlator XR, which is basically seemingly a way to play sort of like PC games on a standalone handheld or SoC. Yep. They've got Halo VR working on the Meta Quest and Pico headsets now. So you too can experience Master Chief's adventures in a form of VR now, which is so it's like they actually have, you can do it both as like a large screen visualizer of the game running, or you can actually do it with like proper per hand controls and like proper VR. And geez, it's actually like, it's wild now, like all these years later, to be able to see something like Halo just running on a standalone VR headset that you can play fully in VR like this. And I think that's really freaking cool. And so, it's something where if you guys happen to have one of these headsets floating around, you're still into it, it's definitely something worth exploring. And it actually seems like this offers some other options for bringing other types of games from the PC over to run on headsets.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So it's like a translation layer, I guess. I haven't experimented enough with it just yet, but it's something available. I guess you can get it through both side quest and other methods as well. But there's basically, it seems like a way to like load on PC games directly on your Quest. And I guess for some of them you just play it like in a window, but this one actually does seem to have proper VR support.
Yeah, I think Winlator is an an x86 to ARM translation layer, right? So we've seen a lot of games running on it, but this one is actually the first VR game that I've seen.
Yes, exactly. So this actually has proper VR implementation, which a lot of them didn't. Some of the other regular ones that work, by the way, you've got stuff like Alien Isolation, BioShock Infinite, Fear runs on there, Fallout 3, GTA 5, apparently. Wow.
Yep.
Halo's definitely on there, of course. Mirror's Edge is on there, and a bunch of others as well. System Shock 2 25th anniversary and System Shock Remake, among others. So those all work on the Quest 3. That's really
amazing.
Cool, I gotta say. I need to play around with more of this. But either way, Halo VR, it's here. Worth checking out. But it's not the only Halo news that we have to talk about, is it? Because so there was this I guess essentially a longtime artist that's worked on many Halo games, the art director, Glenn Israel, he left the franchise behind. And I think it also became clear then looking at the credits that like of all the people that worked on the art for Halo Infinite in the credits there, there's only one person still left there at the studio.
Right.
And with the follow-up to him leaving, there was also comments from people that work for like companies like EA and others, where they commented things like, they even tried to hire me for like 1/3 of my current salary and then only for 2 to 3 months, related to working for quote-unquote Halo Studios, which is the new name for 343. And all of this just kind of makes me think like, what the heck's happening within like the constant mishandling of Halo over the past decade, if you will. is just astounding to me. Like, they really squandered this franchise in a big way, and I feel like they've really struggled to get back on top. And it seems like a lot of it just comes from leadership issues in the way the studio has been run, which, 343, now Halo Studios, especially leaning so heavily on short-term contracting work and like failing to like establish a really solid base of like knowledge and expertise that's within the studio itself. Perhaps, I don't know all the details, but it seems like there's definitely a story brewing there, and it's a shame because Halo was my favorite Xbox franchise, and really just an amazing series of games that never really 343 never managed to really do that much with it. I hate to say it.
Oliver, what do you think about all of this?
Well, I've got to say Project Foundry did look pretty great. And there are rumors that a Halo CE announcement will be incoming, a remake of Halo CE, not the VR project, but a remake. Apparently there's some talk about an announcement potentially October 24th to 26th at the Halo World Championship, something tied in with that. But in general, I think Microsoft's management of their franchises and studios does not seem very good. Obviously, Halo Infinite was an exceptionally poorly run project, I'd have to say. When you look at their practices with contracting, with having people on for 18 months, it just seems like a penny pinching move that ultimately is not destined to produce good results. Maybe it would actually work better, arguably, with this new approach with, working off of a commodity engine. Maybe you could bring in some other people on a more short-term basis. And that, in that instance, obviously did not work so well with, I think, the Slipstream engine, Slipspace engine or Slipstream engine. I can't quite remember.
Slipspace.
Okay. That was the basis for Halo Infinite. I actually enjoyed Halo Infinite in the end, even though it was single biome, even though it was stripped back massively from the kind of original remit in that E3, I think 2018 trailer that looked so terrific. I enjoyed what they shipped, but it was clearly kind of a hollow version of what they had initially proposed. Did not look as good, was not as interesting, was kind of stapled together from disparate parts, was not all that appealing in the end in terms of what it could have been. And I certainly hope that at least with Halo CE, with this remake effort that is rumored to be in development, I would presume that because it is a more back-to-basics effort, because they already have that outline of how the game should be, perhaps they actually could produce an efficient remake. But of course, the kind of, I guess, more obvious question is why remake a game that's already been remade? Perhaps they do something more significant with this remake. I'd imagine it would be a much more significant remake effort than the 2011 Halo CE anniversary, I believe it was called, by Saber. So I'd certainly hope they're doing something interesting with it. But this message does not seem too promising, I would say.
I think, well, from my perspective, the remake side of things, if it's similar to what Gears Reloaded did, right? If you're taking a massive platform exclusive franchise, multi-platform, you kind of want a project to reintroduce it to that new wider audience, which I think is a really good idea. I just hope the actual implementation is good, because there's certainly a lot of worrying signs, from across the years now, that things have not been particularly great at 343 and Halo Studios now. So, yeah, that kind of makes sense. I really do hope that I guess it's a new version of Halo. That's what was kind of hinted at in that particular trailer they put out. I hope it's pretty good. That's all I've really got to say about that. I'd have to admit, though, the VR side of things does look really, really good. I just kind of hope that, I guess there's a question of performance. If it's go through a translation layer there.
Yeah, for sure. And I'd like to play around more with this and maybe come back with stronger impressions here.
Sorry, I just think that the idea is actually really, really cool. And sometimes, even if something isn't going to make a mountain of money, just the fact that it exists and is really cool actually goes a long way. So if there was like an actual official port of Halo Combat Evolved to VR, similar to what Capcom did with Resident Evil 4 and stuff like that, I think that would be really, really cool, and it would get people excited and talking again.
Agree. I actually think that's something that people talk about, VR not being a huge success, but they found their niche. The Quest platform is pretty vibrant. There's a lot of stuff still coming out, and it seems to do fairly well. And I feel like a lot of companies, rather than devoting a lot of money to making big new games, they should really consider this approach, like with what Capcom did, or like what we see here, like this idea of like bringing back a classic game from X number of years ago and like making it run in VR. This is kind of what Team Beef has been doing for free for all these times with all the Doom, Quake, Doom 3 and up games, which are all like expertly crafted. Like they feel like true native VR games. They're absolutely amazing to play it in VR, and they all run natively on the headset. And I feel like there's just money left on the table. It wouldn't be that costly to do this, and I feel like publishers could get some nice results from that. Not only to revive interest in franchises or like strengthen it, but just make some extra money for not a huge investment.
Yeah, and to be fair, Microsoft, it's kind of like a wouldn't it be cool if scenario, right? Wouldn't it be cool if Halo was a VR game? And Microsoft actually were used to be really good at that. Their back compat stuff that was really, really cool. Stuff like FPS
also,
Boost.
If you remember, Rich, Halo Combat Evolved Anniversary supported 3D TV.
Right. Yes.
Actually, I loved playing. I loved playing the 360 version of that in 3D. I had that Sony HMZ T1 headset. Yep. I still have it actually, and which is like it looks like a VR headset but without the motion stuff. It's a giant 3D screen in front of you, and playing Halo in that was so freaking awesome and immersive. So,
any final thoughts, Oliver?
Not too much. I'm excited to see what this game ends up looking like. I'm approaching it with some trepidation. I love Halo C. I'm a huge fan of Halo C. I also did not mind the anniversary treatment too much. I actually enjoy it. Perhaps John is shuddering at the thought, but I actually.
I love the anniversary too.
Yeah,
I thought it was beautiful, but the first anniversary, I thought the visuals were pretty ugly. They didn't look great.
There were definitely elements that did not. It did not have much fealty to that original art.
No.
Yeah, so that's unfortunate, but I am excited for this, and I thought what they showed off with that Project Foundry footage looked terrific, and it did hint heavily at a Halo CE remake, so I'm excited to see how that ends up panning out in the year to come. They're talking about 2026, I think. Phil heavily hinted at that, yeah. so I imagine pretty soon here.
Okay, excellent. Well, let's move on. That was the end of the news, so it's time to move on to Supporter Q&A, which is the part of the show where every week I post on Patreon asking our supporters to pose their questions and reactions to the topics that we're going to be discussing in the Direct. Let's get straight on with this question from Skyrim26 in brackets AI upscaled.
Ooh, nice name.
Gents, the rumoured next-gen Xbox APU sounds pretty amazing, but if the next-gen Xbox was cancelled, would anything really have been lost? Nintendo shows us that gamers buy games, not teraflops, and it's been made clear that nothing will ever again be made to be only on Xbox. Man, John.
Ouch. Yeah, that is kind of...
Does make you think, though, doesn't it?
Man, when you put it that way, it just kind of like makes you think about the whole console business and how it's changed, because it did indeed used to be like you wanted to play certain games, you got the hardware where those games existed. And the whole point of first party games was to create stuff for your hardware to get people invested in your platform. Nintendo has very much continued with that model, and Sony they still follow it to a degree, but a little less so, more like delayed PC releases and stuff like that. But Xbox is kind of, they have indeed sort of walked away from the traditional console style release now that everything's in Xbox. So when you put it that way, yeah, I mean, I guess the thing here is that ultimately what we want to see is like Xbox's studios, and they own so many now, are able to continue to release games, that they find enough success in the market that they can still produce games. So yeah, maybe having no Xbox console wouldn't be a big deal in the end, but if that ended up impacting their ability to succeed and release new stuff, then that would be a lot worse, right? They need a vehicle of some sort to keep the business going. Maybe they can do it without it, I don't know, but either way, like ultimately it's about keeping those games, those studios running, and not allowing Satya to shut them down in favor of more AI stuff.
Yeah, your dislike / hatred of Copilot is now legendary. I think another point that Skyrim Fest 26 in brackets AI upscaled is making is basically it is about games and not about advances in technology, which I'm not sure I'm fully on board with. I think the Switch 2 is actually quite a forward-looking piece of technology, if you think about it. In fact, we've just been talking about a Mark Cerny video that's discussing technologies that Switch 2 has basically got already to a certain degree. Oliver, what do you make of this?
I think this is an interesting question. It certainly is provocative, but I think something will have been lost in the sense that Xbox is an organizing force for Microsoft, like John stated, and moreover, I think there are certain baseline standards of usability that Microsoft would want to enforce for an Xbox. And kind of to put it one way, even if the next generation Xbox is substantially similar to a PC in many respects, I would rather have an Xbox branded PC with a Magnus chip. And, I would trust that would work better with a controller in PC games and be a stable experience and be a good experience than like a generic PC box. I feel like they would try to make that experience good for me. So yeah, I would think that would be a stronger experience, and I do think that would be it would be a better time there. But I do definitely concur that exclusives are a huge part of the business, not just because of their quality, but because of the incentives that go into making them. Oftentimes people are not bundling them with like really aggressive monetization tactics, other nasty bits of business that you see more often in the third-party sphere. And I think once you take exclusives away, all you really have left to market a console platform is Game Pass. And exactly what is the value of Game Pass nowadays? I think that's another definitely an open question. But I would rather Microsoft ship next generation Xbox hardware, not just because I care about the Xbox brand and because I like Xbox, but because I think that would be a more stable platform in which to play PC software. I do think that would be a better experience.
Mm-hmm. I think my answer to this question is pretty straightforward, and it's basically, well, this is actually a really good question. It's down to Microsoft to answer it. Right? And we don't really have that answer at the moment, except for there's two statements that have been made. First of all, the biggest generational leap in any console generation, which ironically I think is coming into focus now via Mark Cerny's disclosures. Bizarrely enough, but why is it coming from Mark Cerny? It's kind of baffling. Secondly, the partnership with AMD, which is again talking about this sort of bringing together of PC and console, and it's not just software side of things, it's the hardware side of things, but it's kind of like teasing and dropping hints and stuff like that. We actually need, I think, the Xbox audience kind of needs a firm message about where everything stands at the moment, because just seems to be negative message after negative message after pratfall after damaging rumors. It's they really need to take control of the narrative at this point in the way that Sony is, to be frank. Anyway, let's move on. Interesting question here from Paul Calamata. Is the era of head-to-head next-generation launches between the major console makers over, and what effects could this have on the future cadence of hardware? For many generations, we've seen new console launches that have either been simultaneous within weeks of each other or within the span of a year. Microsoft broke away from this trend in 2017 with the launch of the Switch and has since followed an offset cycle to Sony and Microsoft. Given what has transpired with the Xbox business recently, there is reason to believe that Microsoft may be bowing out of console hardware or pivoting to a living room PC market where it is no longer competing with Sony directly. Could the result be that console makers no longer base their timelines for successive hardware on a need to compete with when they expect rival hardware to launch? And could this in turn result in lengthier cycles that allow the hardware makers to extract the maximum value from a larger install base? Nintendo waited over 8 years to follow up on the original Switch, knowing that there was no direct threat to their lane that they had to contend with. So basically, pretty obvious, rather lengthy question there, however, which is the concept of the console generation over? John?
Yeah. I mean, we were just kind of talking about this earlier, right? In terms of like release cycles being increasingly lengthy, but I think it all just comes down to software support more than anything. at this point. And I think the release cadence of the consoles is starting to matter less and less as well, just because. So on that front, I think it matters less because the hardware itself is all so much more similar than it used to be, right? So like developers are just going to continue to do their game development sort of like out of sync with whenever the hardware is coming out for the most part, right? It takes X amount of years to make their game. If it happens to overcross like a console launch, then that adds some additional work for sure, but then they essentially just bring the game to that new platform as well. And that's what we've been seeing. So I think we're just at a point where this traditional sort of rollout doesn't really matter anymore.
Yeah.
Like it's not important, because also the increases we're seeing from the hardware don't fundamentally alter the games anymore, right? Like I'm finishing up a retro video now. When you just look at, again, that jump from like PlayStation to PlayStation 2, the leap in terms of what was possible to achieve was so drastic. Like the same types of games couldn't really exist on both. And when you did it, you had to make a different game entirely, because it just conceptually, like what you were trying to do on PS2, like a lot of times just you couldn't do it on the older hardware. And that's just not the case anymore. You can always scale things down. You can always find a way to make it work. And as a result, I think they just don't feel the need to, there's no real need to like try to make everything release around a similar time anymore, right? So that's my take.
Right.
Anyway.
I think also the fact that games are so expensive to make these days that they have to basically run on anything at this point. It's got to kind of run on sort of Steam Deck upwards, which basically does bring into question the, what impact new hardware will bring if it's still running the same games. Oliver, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm kind of mixed. In part, I think there are good reasons to align launches, and if not launches, then certainly align hardware specs, because like you guys have said, that you need to consider the broad market of gaming devices when you launch games. If you're shipping a game in like 2027 or 2028, you're going to need to support a wide range of hardware, and PS6 and next gen Xbox will slot into that, and there needs to be some commonality and spec commonality and capabilities between different hardware platforms so you can ship games across a variety of different systems. But I also think that at the moment, it's probably becoming more of a two-horse console race, and then off in the corner you have PC. PC is kind of doing its own thing. It's continuing to advance in kind of stepwise ways as as the years go on, as architectures advance. And I think Xbox is slotting in more into that PC zone, where it's a little bit, it's just getting those PC ports, and really it's like the PlayStation 6 that's setting that common spec. I think that might be going on a little bit more there with the next generation of console games, assuming the next generation Xbox is not like a gigantic sales hit, which I mean, it may yet be. But yeah, I would think it's really, there's some degree to which it's more about stewardship of the whole ecosystem, and that can align some of the incentives with competitive incentives that you might have had in the past. But at the moment, it just kind of, remains to be seen exactly how Microsoft slots into that ecosystem with their next generation hardware effort. I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, I think, everything that we're sort of seeing from the Magnus leap kind of suggests that it's going to be a device that is going to be extremely powerful, but also very, very expensive by console terms, but relatively affordable by PC terms. So the way they actually market it is going to be quite interesting, I think. And the extent to which there may be OEM devices that we've discussed at length before. The timing of it in terms of, the arrival of it, I think it's a great time, 2026 to 2028. It's a great time to basically introduce those devices, because we are now starting to reach a sort of critical mass of PC GPUs out there that are actually capable of really good ray tracing performance, so capable of really good machine learning performance. So maybe, the concept of a generation isn't so much, 2020 to 2028, an 8-year cycle. It's just a kind of evolving cycle. Certainly the thing that you kind of suggest that's suggested by the AMD partnership with Microsoft is that they can actually tap into the much shorter sort of lifespan of devices, upgrading 2 or 3 years rather than 8 years, just keeping up with PC in that regard. But the basic question is the concept of a console generation over. I'd say not for now, but probably by the end of the decade would be my sort of quick take on that. Let's move on. Question here from Anxiously Chronoed Figured. Hey gents, exclamation point, since we're probably in for one of the longest console generations yet, and we shouldn't expect many big crisis-like leaps in visuals, do you think developers will start focusing on other ways to make their games stand out? Maybe more advanced physics, unique mechanics, or other innovations? One can hope, right? Cheers! Exclamation point. Oliver, that sounds pretty great, doesn't it?
It does sound pretty great, but I'd say these are all like really hard things. Like I obviously I took a look at Battlefield. I'm continuing to take a look at the latest Battlefield 6, and if you look at that game, it has kind of a, it kind of has this destruction system that's interesting looking and has some kind of physics based components with the way that the physicalized debris and whatnot falls, and that's certainly a visually satisfying system. But at a core level, it's very similar to the destruction system that shipped in 2010 in Bad Company 2, in the sense that it's a state-based system. You kind of blow out walls there, these predefined chunks that you can damage in the structures, and if you hit a certain number of those critical points, you can in some cases bring down parts or the entire structure. It's a kind of similar system in terms of the way that it works. Fundamentally, it does feel like a very similar system to the system that shipped in Bad Company 2. And I just think if you want to do something more real than that, quote unquote, more physics based, like in Teardown, that is not really a physics system. That is not really a destruction system that's going to scale, I think, to the needs of a multiplayer shooter, to the needs of a big single player shooter that needs to have more directed levels, that needs to have all these constraints placed on it to actually function as a game. So I think the reason why devs focus on visuals in many cases is because they are controllable, because they are manageable. When you look at a game like Tears of the Kingdom, for instance, that has these very complex gameplay systems, has lots of interesting physics going on, has game-breaking features like the warp above you and all that stuff, that is a very hard game to make. That took 6 years. They were reusing a lot of the map from the original title, and that was a very arduous, I think, development process where they were talking about a lot of polishing of the various systems they had in that game to make sure that it worked and make sure that it was stable enough to meet AAA standards. I think there are some things you can do that are interesting with simulation. Like I look at the recent Astrobot game, a lot of that game's physics and stuff like that. It's very much a visual showcase, right? It does not have as much impact on gameplay. But I think if you want to actually introduce physics, if you want to introduce these components as fundamental aspects of your game, then I think in many cases you're talking about different kinds of games than the games that exist nowadays. And I don't know those games always slot into the AAA bucket. I don't know that the physics-based Battlefield is a AAA game, right? I think that Battlefield is the way it is because of the kind of game it is, and not because of some kind of fundamental technological limitation. So, yeah, just a few thoughts there.
What do you think, John? Because I'm kind of thinking back to the Xbox 360 generation where we did actually see things, go in very different directions. You saw games like Assassin's Creed arrive. You saw Far Cry 2 and Crisis in that same period where they were, doing things that were just kind of crazy compared to the prior generation.
I mean, that was that whole generation of let's simulate things, right? And I would argue it kind of started with like late 90s. There was some PC stuff and things like Shenmue as well, where it was like, what if we could just recreate like these cities and all these little minutia? What if you could open a drawer and pull stuff out? Like that was like an aspiration that a lot of developers had. And in the end, I think for most types of games, from a gameplay perspective, it wasn't always that interesting. But building a simulation-based game definitely is something that can work and is quite cool, but it's also quite challenging. And to tie that into the physics discussion, I always say physics is one of those things where it's either just a visual effect or it's a gameplay mechanic. And a lot of games use physics for pure visual splendor. I would say that's where Astrobot mostly falls, right? And I think that's awesome, where the physics interactions, mostly it just looks cool, but it doesn't fundamentally change the game. Whereas some of the other stuff, that we've seen before, like, Crisis is one where I would say, since that was referenced, that was an example of physics being used for gameplay purposes to some degree. Being able to blow up an entire shack and just the way things reacted, that did have an effect on the gameplay that was really cool. But doing that stuff's hard. We haven't had many big physics-based games for a long time. I think one of the biggest ones that I can remember in the last decade is something like The Last Guardian, which was one gigantic, insane physics AI like thing where you have this giant creature that's moving independently of the player, and you have to somehow work together. And I'm surprised when you see how that game came out. It's insane that it worked at all. To be honest, that was so stupidly ambitious, especially for the PS3 era when it started development. But it also didn't work for everyone because those types of games are really, really hard to make, as far as I can tell. So, but I think at this point we're just. I don't think we're gonna get anything where it's like you see like this giant leap that seems way beyond where we've ever expected it to go, unless there's some sort of like major paradigm shift in terms of rendering. Like it didn't go fully the way I necessarily expected, but you look at what Media Molecule did with Dreams, and like some of the stuff that it was able to render was like almost like unbelievable. Like you're like, how the heck did this work? Because they fundamentally rendered things in a very different way. And I could see someone coming up with something like that, maybe even exploiting like ray tracing hardware, or like doing something to render Outer World in a way that's very fundamentally different than we currently do it, and coming up with results that we don't expect. I could see that happening, maybe. We don't know what that looks like yet, though. But outside of that, I think most games, the biggest limitation on how good something looks currently is still going to be a budget thing, and a manpower thing, right?
Right. Well, maybe there's actually going to be a full realization of the stuff that was promised for this generation. So, you think about those original Unreal Engine 5 demos, you think about the Matrix Awakens.
True.
We actually seen games that kind of live up to the promise of those demos?
Oh, no, not really. I mean, Matrix Awakens looked, that was still absolutely stunning rendering. But I mean, the only hope on that front is I still think I'm very curious to see how Gears EA turns out. Like they're the ones that can probably get closest to realizing that, but we'll see.
Okay, let's move on. This question from Cava G, maybe. Hello, Digital Foundry. As a PS5 Pro owner, in brackets GTA 6, I feel it's been eerily quiet a year on, but I'm excited to see how the cross-gen generation pans out. If the PS6 is a 2x multiplier on the Pro, there can't be much the PS6 could handle that you couldn't pare back for the Pro. I don't think the same could be said for the base PS5. What are your thoughts on the Pro's capability for cross-gen? My sort of quick take on this is that it's kind of almost like an Xbox One X situation where you have this really interesting piece of technology that probably won't sort of survive that long into a cross-gen period if the base console doesn't, because those two are inextricably linked. So, the Xbox One X was actually quite fantastic as a console, but it's only like very few developers that continued to push on it. I think Hello Games is a good example with No Man's Sky. They continued to bring like a lot of the current gen graphical upgrades into that version because they could, but there's probably not really too much need to do so. I think that's kind of it. They're kind of two consoles of a generation, and if one can't do it, then the other won't get it. What do you think, Oliver?
Yeah, I think that devs are not going to ship on just Pro and not PS5, obviously. So I think you're much more likely to see Pro games that are extensions of PS5 than Pro games that are lower fidelity versions of like the PS6 version of the games. And also, like, in terms of scaling the games, there are some things that, like, even though the PS5 Pro notionally has obviously has very good machine learning and ray tracing acceleration. In terms of pulling off something like a path race game, like we've seen with RDNA 4 and PC, that is not necessarily an approach. Like, really heavy ray tracing workloads are not going to scale as well as you would think on a PlayStation 5 Pro versus similarly situated NVIDIA or Intel hardware that might otherwise be used as benchmarks for that class of performance. Running like things like LLMs, if you want to do stuff like that on a PlayStation 6, I don't think the PS5 Pro is going to do that all that well with its approach to machine learning acceleration. So I think there are some things that like seem like if they were scaling linearly with kind of the expected performance delta between the different categories of hardware, you would get acceptable scaling. but in practice, you won't, because those kinds of workloads are just so much heavier. And the PS6's machine learning and ray tracing acceleration is probably going to be so much faster than the PlayStation 5 Pros and so much more capable and extensible to different kinds of workloads there.
Mm-hmm. John?
Yeah, I mean, not much more to say than that. You're absolutely right, Oliver. I think some things will be scalable, some things won't.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of takes me back to the Xbox Series S versus Xbox One X last gen, where on paper there was actually some pretty significant advantages in the One X's favor, right? But it was also much weaker in certain other areas that would make certain types of games a little more difficult, or at least, so yeah, it really just depends on how they're exploiting the new hardware as to whether it'll actually be feasible, right? But I think it'll be pretty feasible given how, given what we're hearing about cross generation.
Right.
So we'll see.
Okay, this question comes from Afreem the Dream. Greetings, Foundryman! ! Microsoft released 4 generations of Xbox consoles, and in terms of sales, the only true success was the Xbox 360. Even Sony's worst, PlayStation 3, outsold Microsoft's best. Are we looking back at the Xbox brand through rose-tinted glasses, considering 3 out of 4 generations were fairly awful? Do you guys believe 3 out of their 4 consoles were fairly awful? Cheers! ! Well, John, I think the question at the end there is probably we don't think they were fairly awful.
Absolutely not. That is so. This is why I don't like looking at sales alone as like judging something, right? First of all, the original Xbox, I would say, was genuinely an amazing little machine. Yeah, it may not have been a huge sales success compared to PlayStation 2, but Microsoft was trying everything, and there was so much interesting software on the Xbox. And not only so, like, you got just like cool Sega was doing stuff, Microsoft was experimenting, you had Japanese, American, European developers, everybody trying their hand at different Xbox things, and so much of it was really, really cool and unusual, which I loved. But then in addition, of course, it was usually the best place for multi-platform games at the time, with either best image quality, performance, or both. And it's just and it gave us so many just incredible experiences at the time that I still look back on. Like, I'm not a big online gamer these days, but man, those early days of Xbox Live were some of my favorites. Obviously Splinter Cell, the second Splinter Cell, the Spies versus Mercs stuff. I don't know if any of you guys spent time with that, but that was just like this magical moment in online play. It's like where you had 2 different mechanics, 2 different styles of play fighting against each other. The microphone, it really felt like unbelievable at the time. And of course, Halo dominated my days in college. 4 Xboxes networked together. That was another thing. The Xbox was all about local networking, and then eventually Xbox Live as well. Like, there was just so much going on there. I love the original Xbox. And then Xbox 360, which, as he says, was a big success. I felt that this vision continued and was strengthened, and that original 360 team, like, they really got it. And it was the one that actually got the most support from Japan as well. Like, we got like the creator of Final Fantasy making 2 amazing RPGs for that system, right? With Blue Dragon and Lost Odyssey, which are just incredibly good games. And there's just so much, like, Cave went big on there. There's so many shooters on there, lots of weird random Japanese games, but also like the stuff coming out, everywhere around the world. I mean, it was a really interesting, cool system. It was beautifully designed. It was very capable. The hardware was super smart and well done. Microsoft was still playing in all the different pools with so many different genres. Like, their first party output was amazing during this period. The 360 only really faltered. One, obviously the Red Ring stuff, not great, but that I don't take that away from the software lineup. The software was still incredible. Just the hardware had a major flaw, and ultimately so did PS3 with the yellow light of death situation. But I think things just took a turn, frankly, with Kinect. And I think it comes down to them trying to chase Nintendo's success with the Wii and fundamentally misunderstanding it and like going down a route that was not the correct route for the system. That plus like deciding that, we don't need first party studios that much anymore. We can get by with third parties. Those decisions, man, that had such a horrible impact on everything that they built. Like all the founders and the creators that built Xbox up through the midway of Xbox 360, I feel like there was just this turn where that entire vision was compromised and they lost everything that made classic Xbox just so darn good. Because, obviously that fed into Xbox One, which gave off to that horrible E3 showing and Don Matrick just putting his foot in his mouth over and over again. And all the negativity around Xbox really stems down to that little period there, I feel, for a while, where it was just like the Kinect, the Xbox One, all this stuff was not good for Microsoft. But I feel like Xbox One actually kind of crawled back for a while. Like they started to turn the opinions around. More good games were happening. The Xbox One X was a really nice piece of kit. And I feel like up through 2020, Xbox was like trending in the right way, And then it just, Series X, despite being an amazing piece of hardware, like everything fell apart. And we ended up where we're at now. And I don't want to lay the blame fully at their feet, but I felt like the goal was to get Halo Infinite out at launch for Xbox Series X. They wanted Halo Infinite to reboot that series, give Xbox a fresh face. This was going to be like the next chapter for everything. And then when that fell apart and didn't happen right, like that was like the canary in the coal mine for this system. So, but I think overall, I mean, they've made good hardware overall outside of maybe Xbox One. And most of their time in the game market, I think, has been pretty awesome. It's really just the early Xbox One, late 360 era, and then like recent times where things were not good, I would say.
Oliver?
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that. I think Xbox 360 was a real high point. That was such an extraordinary machine for the time. Hardware design was incredible. The games were amazing, especially the early 360 games. So many great titles in there. Xbox One also had some excellent stuff, I feel like, some solid games, not as many as PS4 perhaps, but still quite strong. And then with the One X, you had the best console for multiplats towards the end of that generation by a good margin. With the Scorpio hardware, it was quite good. I really feel like Microsoft's decline was maybe twofold. The first thing was just a lack of first-party software, a comparative lack, not maybe an absolute lack, but a comparative lack. Because I remember going towards the end of the 360 PS3 generation, I had started out that generation playing a lot more on 360, but over the course of that generation, towards the end of it, it just seemed like Sony really ratcheted up their first-party output. It seemed like it was coming in at a really consistent quality level. You had like Uncharted, Infamous, The Last of Us, MotorStorm, lots of great games in those franchises, and they were delivering. Killzone as well, tons of great games. And Xbox didn't have the same volume. And then, of course, the second issue is the Kinect issue, and both those issues kind of led to the Xbox One generation maybe not being as good as it could have been. And then, of course, Series is kind of like it's still great in many respects, but certainly some compromises in there in the mix as well. But I would certainly I would disagree with the idea that you're dealing with like 3 generations of failure. I would not agree with that sentiment at all. I think that you have 3 generations of maybe not great sales success, but I think you have 4 generations of great hardware, 4 generations of lots of great games. Series is tailing off a little bit at the moment, at present, but certainly all those consoles have something to commend them. All the hardware designs were quite great, I think, for the time, or at least maybe not the original Xbox One, but certainly Scorpio hardware in that generation. And I actually have very positive feelings about Microsoft hardware. I have very positive feelings about Microsoft consoles, even though they've had some recent issues. So I don't think that a lack of sales success should be mistaken for a failure to produce a good product. I think they're great products.
Also, let's keep in mind that you look at like Nintendo, right? Like the Wii U, that was a failure, right?
Yeah.
That's less than 14 million units sold. That's worse than anything Xbox has put out. The GameCube as well. I love the GameCube, but it sold worse than the original Xbox, right? So that didn't stop Nintendo from continuing on and making amazing stuff.
Yeah.
You have ups and downs. It's really just somehow Sony has managed to like keep those sales really high outside of, say, PlayStation Vita.
Yeah. Or PSVR as well.
The only one.
That's an accessory, I suppose.
That's an accessory. That's like talking about Pocket Station or something.
My only thoughts on this is, I don't know. I think Xbox began with a great deal of hunger from Microsoft to really make an impact on the gaming market, and then they basically moved up to 11 with Xbox 360. I mean, they were pushing the very latest process nodes, very latest technology on all fronts for Xbox 360. They were doing things like getting GTA 4 to appear on Xbox at the same time as PlayStation. Which they hadn't been successful on in the past. The PlayStation was firmly established as the place to play GTA. That kind of changed. They had a year advantage over PlayStation for whatever reason. I think there were problems with PlayStation, but ultimately they pushed and pushed and pushed, and it was always about great games, right? And expanding the platform in that respect, and just being excited about games. And you're right, John, that did kind of sort of taper back with Kinect, which in retrospect kind of cool, but also kind of cynical. I remember being in the whole Kinect presentation at Gamescom, and was trying to play Burnout Paradise on with Kinect. It's kind of like they were kind of suggesting that the Kinect could actually replace the controller.
That's a horrible idea. It's not comfortable. It's not fun. Like, as an accessory to some things, there could be some interest there, but beyond that, no freaking way. And honestly, like, it wasn't that much different than what Sony did with the iToy on PlayStation 2, if we're honest. Right? Like, it's more technically advanced, but that's the level of kind of interactivity we got. It's like a fun party trick. But Sony didn't try to sell the iToy as like, this is where PlayStation's going.
And unfortunately, you're quite right. It set the stage for that. And I think telemetry. I think at the tail end of the Xbox 360 generation, Microsoft were looking at telemetry that was saying, hey, actually, a lot of people are using their Xbox 360s to watch Netflix. Maybe we should become this multimedia console instead. And that, obviously, the rest is history after that initial reveal there. So that's kind of when if you stop focusing on games, you've got problems. And I think, PlayStation, to their credit, they realized with PlayStation 3 that things had to change. They brought in Mark Cerny. Vita obviously wasn't a sales success, but the concept of the machine was just rock solid. Bring that concept over to a console. And, basically we've had, huge amounts of success for Sony based on simply focusing on hardware that enables great games and delivering great games. There could have been a slip up this generation for Sony because of the failed games as a service initiative. But ultimately, Microsoft didn't capitalize on the kind of diminished amount of exclusives that Sony had. And in fact, what can you say? PlayStation continues to do extremely well, Microsoft less so. But certainly there's a lot of really fantastic memories with Xbox, and hopefully they can come back at some point. Okay, final question. This one comes from AMH. Hey, gents, do you guys have any idea how much the Switch 2's T239 chip is underclocked compared to the Tegra X1 in the original Switch? I'm curious about how far Nintendo dialed things back from the chip's full potential, especially since the X1 was already running way below its max clocks for heat and battery reasons. So, yeah, that basically the CPU was massively downclocked in Tegra X1 and the GPU significantly so, especially in handheld form, obviously. So what's the situation with Switch 2? Well, actually, we did a video and indeed an article on Eurogamer back in the day where we published the direct specifications from developer documentation. And lo and behold, that documentation included the theoretical maximums for the CPU and the GPU. So with the CPU, we're on about 1 gigahertz to 1100 megahertz. And the maximum there is 1.7 gigahertz, similar to what happened with Tegra X1, funnily enough. And looking at the GPU, 1007 megahertz, 1 gigahertz docked, 561 megahertz mobile. But again, there's a higher threshold there, 1.4 gigahertz. So I guess from that perspective, there might actually be the concept of Switch 2 being slightly more being held back than the Switch 1 equivalents. But
Indeed.
Regardless, those decisions were made for a reason, and I guess it was battery and thermals. Oliver, anything to add?
So if we look at Switch 2, actually, there is a product out there that's also manufactured on a similar process node, not the same process node, obviously, but a similar process node, 8 nanometer product. That's Orin, the Orin line of products, Orin NX, Orin Nano, and Orin AGX. And if you look at the CPU in Orin AGX in particular, because that's the most, I think, the highest clocked of the Orin products, that is a Cortex A78 based CPU, and that operates at 2.2 gigahertz. Right. So that's twice the Switch 2's maximum CPU clock. If you look at the GPU in Orin AGX, it's 1300 megahertz in the GPU. So in that product, they're basically configuring it at 1300 megahertz. The Switch 2 maximum is 1 gigahertz. If you go over to Switch 1, you have a much more direct comparator, because you just have a Tegra X1 being fed with mains power in the NVIDIA Shield TV. Right. In that case, you're also looking at a 1 gigahertz CPU in Switch 1, 2 gigahertz in Shield. So again, that's exactly twice this clock that's in the portable product, it's in the home product. And then on the GPU side of things, you're looking at about a 23% lower GPU clock there. So I think if you look at that, maybe that's a little bit, maybe I'll put it in the table in the video for people to look at. I think when you actually look at the percentages, the relative percentages, they look very, very similar, I think, with respect to the decrease in clocks on those two chips versus the maximums. Ampere itself often hits like 1600, 1700 megahertz in desktop products. There are a number of comparators that you could use here, but I think overall the general trend is that both switches are probably about a similar margin underclocked from their other products on similar process nodes that are made by NVIDIA, these similar products with similar architectures. But I don't think this is like a super interesting question, because these are products that hit different product segments, and ultimately, like when you're looking at a CPU clock in a performance constrained device, even in a device like Orin AGX, which is very wide, I think they aren't necessarily going to be hitting like the maximum clocks that you could conceivably hit with those chips, with those CPUs, with those GPUs.
Yeah, I mean, the Switch 2 is what it is. There is potential that you could access those additional clocks, but it would require, obviously, well, an exploit, first of all, and then a whole sort of ecosystem for running exploits and homebrew code. So, it happened on Switch 1, but Switch 2 seems to be a bit more resilient to exploits. But it's certainly an interesting sort of window into the tolerances of the chip and the potential performance in there. And also, I guess, although it's not going to happen, if there is ever a die shrink, you know, there is the potential for actually running at higher clocks. It's just that if Switch 1 is any kind of indicator, they'll just stick to the same clocks and pocket the extra battery life, which, to be fair, in the case of Switch 2 is probably the right call for sure. Not sure if you have anything to add there, John.
I think the clocks are fine. I wish they'd put that extra battery to use and fix the screen. Do something with that gosh darn screen.
Fair enough. Okay, that was the final question, therefore the end of the show. So please do like, subscribe, share if you enjoyed it, ring bells for notifications for you, instant notifications potentially, and similarly potential algorithmic boosts for us. But yes, it is really all about the DF supporter program, patreon.com/Digital Foundry to help support the team in what we do, and store.digitalfoundry.net if you fancy walking about with clothes with our logo on it, which sounds great to me. But that's all from us on this one. Thanks for watching and supporting Digital Foundry. We'll see you next week.